I'm Josh Rosen, illustrator of The Good Fight, and you're listening to the True North Country Comics Podcast.
Welcome to the True North Country Comics Podcast, dedicated to promote Canadian comic book creators and supporters. It's June 11th, 2021. I'm John Swinimer. If you want to drop me a line, you can contact me at john@truenorthcountrycomics.com. On this episode, I chat with Josh Rosen about The Good Fight. This podcast is available on Apple Podcasts and Google Podcasts. It's also available on the True North Country Comics channel on YouTube. I invite you to like and subscribe. Josh is a cartoonist and illustrator from Toronto, Ontario. He claims that he's loved drawing and telling stories since pretty much forever. Josh has done illustration work for magazines, websites, animation projects, documentary films, and role-playing games. He's explained that when exploring his own work, he enjoys making comics about friendship, spooky stuff, and real-world history, often filtered through a playful or comic lens. When he's not making comics, he works in children's arts education, helping students over a wide range of ages find their own creative voices. Published by Scholastic, The Good Fight, written by Ted Staunton and illustrated by Josh, is a middle-grade graphic novel set in the tense, turbulent Toronto summer of 1933, in the depths of the Great Depression. And so, without further ado, here's my chat with Josh Rosen about The Good Fight. So, Josh Rosen, thank you very much for taking time to chat with me.
Oh yeah, thanks for having me.
I appreciate your time. What I normally do to start off the interview is ask the creator about their first comic book. So I'm wondering if you remember, what was the first comic book that you read?
So I don't know if this is the very first one that I've ever, who knows what I encountered as a child, but the one that sort of stuck in my memory the most at an early age was I remember finding a issue of Silver Surfer at the grocery store. It was something that had to do with like Silver Surfer flying through space, and then there was like a planet that was a living planet. It wasn't Ego, the living planet. It was some sort of weird fleshy planet. And I remember this comic from an early age because I remember sort of just seeing all these strange images in it and needing to know what happened and having to beg my mother to buy it from the grocery store. She just had zero interest in it whatsoever and refused to read it to me. She was like, this is not nonsense. So I remember having to go to my grandmother and being like, please explain what is happening in this Silver Surfer comic to me. And she very patiently read through it with me at a young age.
Wow, that's great. Having a supportive grandmother like that. That's wonderful.
Yeah, yeah. And my mom, thankfully, has also come around on comics.
There you go. Good to hear. Well, wanted to ask you, who or what influences your work today?
I've moved on somewhat from Silver Surfer since then. These days, I think I'm influenced quite a lot. I really am a big fan of the kind of lean Claire style of artwork, that like clean line European style. So I look a lot at artists sort of who work in that tradition quite a bit. I also pull a lot as a teenager, not uncommon. I was very manga obsessed once upon a time, and I still sort of pull from that quite a bit. I especially like the work of Naoki Urasawa is someone I look at a lot. Even like Akira Toriyama and things like that gets me excited. Yeah, I'm obsessed with Jaime Hernandez in the lean Claire tradition. I really like Gillian Tamaki and Vera Broskol and some of the other sort of artists working in a more contemporary style that sort of blend a lot of these traditions together. Sorry, I'm rambling a little bit, I guess.
That's a lot of good stuff. Yeah, that's what it sounds like.
I should speak towards for The Good Fight. I drew a little bit from two people that I was very fortunate to have as teachers, the cartoonist Jason Lutz and James Sturm, two creators who have done a lot of work in historical context, and whose work I was very readily able to sort of pull off the shelf and look at, and who I fortunately had the privilege of learning from directly when I was a student at the Center for Cartoon Studies.
Wow, that's amazing. Good stuff there, that's for sure. So
Yeah.
you've already mentioned our topic of discussion, The Good Fight. Wonder if you could talk a bit about the graphic novel, what it's about, and maybe the origins of the project too.
Yes, totally. So The Good Fight is a historical fiction, kid-oriented graphic novel set in Toronto in the 1930s. Revolves around the riot at Christie Pitts, if anyone's familiar with that big event in Canadian history. It's about a group of kids who sort of are living through the Great Depression and have sort of resorted to being pickpockets for sort of petty change, but unfortunately get kind of caught up with the moment in history, a lot of the sort of political and social tensions of the time in the lead up to World War II, and end up sort of in over their head with, corrupt cops and gangsters, and dealing with a lot of the racism at the time. Specifically, there was a huge amount of racism that was directed towards the Jewish and Italian populations at the time, and it sort of all culminates at the riots themselves. This project is sort of a collaborative brainchild. It was between myself and the writer Ted Staunton. His grandfather was the mayor of Toronto during the riots. Ted's got this family connection with this story, and he's been sitting on it for some time, or had been sort of percolating with him, partially inspired by his grandfather, as far as I understand it. And we had sort of met at a children's writers and illustrators conference and had really sort of hit it off. And we were interested in collaborating. We'd sort of been talking about it for a bit, and then the world sort of took a little bit of a shift. Sort of 2016 happened. There was a lot more talk, just a lot of the sort of similar tensions to what had happened in Toronto in the 1930s felt like they were manifesting today. And it suddenly felt very relevant, and that kind of lit a fire under us to sort of really take this concept that we've been sort of kicking around and really try to take it to publishers and see if we could bring it to life. And thankfully, the wonderful folks at Scholastics really believed in this project, and we were able to work with them on it.
So I wanted to ask about the process that you said writer Ted Staunton did. Like, presumably he would come up with the original story, and then he would send you some pages, or how would that work?
Yeah. That was a huge part of it. We sort of very early on, we actually did. I was very lucky to be, I think, invited into some of the early stages of the process with Ted. Even in our early conversations, had said a lot that he really was looking for a collaborator on it, more than just a sort of hired hand. So I was very lucky that we got to sort of talk a little bit about what was going to be explored in the project, talk about the arc and the characters a little bit together, and then Ted went off. He really did sort of the real work at that point of turning it into a script, breaking it down, and then he sent me. Our process kind of evolved over time. At first, he tried sort of doing kind of like pseudo thumbnails, I guess, sort of laying it out page by page. But, comics are difficult, I think, when you're not very familiar with them. And his sort of, I think he struggled a little bit at just the learning curve of the sense of pacing you need through a page. He did a very good job too, but it was different than my own sense of pacing, I guess, is the maybe more specifically. So we sort of revisited our process and turned it into just him producing a script, and then I would translate into pages. And I sort of did roughs that were kind of proposals of how I was thinking of laying it out. And then we would do a back and forth. Sometimes we would change things. Sometimes he would say, I think we should hit this moment a little differently, or I think that this detail should stick out a little bit. And we were able to have a bit of a back and forth like that throughout the process.
Now, considering this event took place in the 1930s and not today, I'm wondering what sort of research did you have to do to come up with the artwork, the illustrations for this book?
Oh, good Lord. There was a lot. It's very intimidating, I think, taking on a historical piece, especially for myself, where I sort of had familiarity with the time period, but I hadn't immersed myself at all. So there was a huge period when we knew this project was going to happen, where we sort of the both of us, but I think myself especially, I spent a lot of time doing research at I spent some time at City of Toronto Archives, the Ontario Jewish Archives, just finding as many images, honestly, as possible. I would also sort of go through the fonts, go through some of the old reference just sketching from a lot of the material that you couldn't reproduce or couldn't take home. Did a lot of looking at honestly like park layouts of Christie Pitts to make sure I had a good sense of the area, and even like, it felt like a crime film almost or something. I went through the microfilm, saw I don't know if you know this, but the ride at Christie Pitts, there was actually only one image, only one photo that was taken of the rides themselves. It's very dark and it's very blurry, and I looked at the original microfilm of that image and sort of got to sort of adjust the brightness as best I could to make it as clear as possible before I was able to print it out. There was a long process of sort of immersing in that. Also, just looking at old magazines, that ended up becoming the trick that I was very proud of, was finding old magazines as like fashion magazines and things like that, old Eaton catalogs, and using those as color reference, because there's only black and white photography, but those magazines were in color, so you could get a sense of what everything looked like in color, because we knew this was going to be a full color book.
Right.
So that was before I even put pencil to page on any of that stuff. There was that huge period in the lead up.
My goodness, that sounds very daunting.
Yeah, it felt that way at the start, but then after a certain point, you kind of get it. That's part of the fun, is the challenge of it, right?
Very good. Cool. I want to switch gears slightly and talk about the tools that you use to create your art. I wonder if you could walk me through your workflow. How do you get it done?
Yeah, totally. So this book was all drawn digitally. I think it kind of needed to be just for what the timeline on it was. It's it's a very thick book, and I had to draw quite a few pages. Once I started going through Ted's script, I realized that it kind of needed to be that way. But to turn it around in the timeline, digital was just the fastest way to do it. So it was working in Adobe Photoshop. Because I was working digital, sort of when I moved from roughs to finals, all of my roughs had been drawn digitally, and I was able to just blow them up and sort of turn those very rough sketches into much more refined versions directly without having to do anything to reproduce it. Yeah, I don't know. That's more or less what it was. It also let sort of, especially as we, the fact checkers at Scholastic, whenever we found a historical detail that was off, which I'm sure we still miss stuff, but every once in a while something would come up, and working digitally gave us the freedom to let me go back and edit things here and there, being like, okay, a camera shouldn't quite look like that, or this character should have a slightly different clothes style than what we have. I was able to adjust those on the fly because of working digitally.
Very cool. Yeah, that's very handy for sure.
Mm-hmm.
I'm wondering what advice you might want to give to someone who's going to make their own comic book or graphic novel. What's the one piece of advice you would give them? Oh
yeah, I mean, really, it's maybe a little trite. I don't know, but I sincerely believe that all there is, as a wise Muppet once said, there's nothing to it but to do it. It's maybe the boring answer, but it really is sort of just practice and just being brave enough to put your stuff out there. You stay hungry, but you keep producing work. Having finished work is what pushes you towards the next thing, I think.
Makes sense, for sure. So we talked about the good fight. I wonder if you could talk about what's next for you. What big projects do you have on the go right now?
Yeah. So I don't know if it's being announced. I'm already working on my next project, which is going to be another kid-oriented historical graphic novel. I don't know if we have like the official name or any of the other details are available yet, but I'm in the early stages of sort of staying in the same period of history, more or less.
Very cool. Good. So where do you recommend people go to find out more about your current and future projects online?
If you want to learn more about me, my website, which is kind of the hub for all of my things, is just joshdraws.com. So pretty simple. On Instagram, it's jrosen.illustration. And on Twitter, it's at @JoshaRaunch. I'm very bad at brand synergy, I'll admit it, but all of it links to joshdraws.com. So if you go there, you'll be able to find everything else.
Great. Well, Josh, those are all the questions I have for you, but I'm wondering, is there something I didn't ask that you'd like to get across in this interview?
I very sincerely hope that people enjoy this book, that they connect with it, both Ted and myself. I know that we strongly hope that this will be an enjoyable book, but also that it's a potential conversation starter for some heavier issues that it can be hard to find a good way to talk about in this, especially for young folks. I think this provides an opportunity to tackle this, and hopefully in a way that's pretty engaging.
Thanks to Josh for the chat. You can discover more about Josh on Twitter at Josh ARONCH, and on Instagram at jrosen.illustration, and online at joshdraws.com. And thanks to you for listening to the True North Country Comics podcast. If you haven't done so already, please subscribe to and like this podcast on Apple Podcasts. And please leave a good rating. Also check out the TrueNorthCountryComics.com website and follow along on Twitter at True North Comics. True North Country Comics is now on YouTube. Please like and subscribe to that video channel. Please send your feedback to John at TrueNorthCountryComics.com. Thanks again for listening, and come back soon for another episode. Bye for now. True North Country Comics Podcast is copyright True North Country Comics, copyright 2021.